There are a lot of left-wing commentators in independent media who often have the best critiques of mainstream media that you could find, but who still miss this fundamental part about how the mainstream media operates in their analysis. When they describe how the mainstream media covers lefties like Bernie and the incredibly hacky stories that they do about him, they describe it as a bias, whether it's a bias towards the establishment or a bias towards access to establishment politicians and business executives, or whether it's a bias of their own financial interest, because if certain progressive policies were to become law, it affects their bottom line. There are several different kinds of biases in the media, and they try to basically sum up the shitty coverage that they do of people like of lefties like Bernie into the box of, oh, it's just a bias. Me, on the other hand, for a while now, I've maintained that this has gone way, way far beyond just some internal bias that you have. This is deliberate journalistic malpractice to smear and undermine people like Bernie Sanders, while at the same time propping up and defending establishment centrist corporate politicians who these different outlets and different journalists and people in news have decided that they like, or have decided are acceptable and reasonable politicians. And after this last week in news and politics, where not once but twice the mainstream media in unison decides to throw all journalistic integrity and journalistic standards and ethics out the window to push these disgusting orchestrated smear jobs and character assassination of Bernie Sanders. At first, it was this bullshit, horseshit Elizabeth Warren story in CNN where they were quoting 4 anonymous sources that had knowledge of a private meeting between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So 4 people who were not in the room, but they heard from somebody about what happened in the room. CNN quotes them and acts like those are original sources who had direct knowledge of what happened. Clearly they gossip, and under any other circumstances, any journalist, any reporter would know that you can't just credibly quote people anonymously who are telling you gossip about a situation that they had no direct knowledge of. Under any other circumstances, a reasonable editor would not allow a story like that to be published. But since it reinforces a narrative that they were already pushing, which is that Bernie Sanders is a disgusting sexist and he's a liar, they decide to run with it regardless. So you have to understand how intentional this was. However many reporters were working on this story, and then you have the editors who allowed this to print. All these people are supposed to be professionals who have years and years and years of experience in journalism and know that this isn't how you source a story. But they all were on board and they all decided, oh no, it's cool to run this story because it reinforces their narrative. That is intentional. That is deliberate. And more than that, everyone at CNN who are also alleged journalists and reporters, they know that's not how you source a story, but they all ran with it too. So again, that's what I'm saying. This isn't a bias. It's not like something working in their subconscious and it's influencing their work and they're not even aware of it. That's what a bias is. This is deliberate, intentional journalistic malpractice. They provided no context for the situation. Context being the timing of the story being released right the day before the last primary debate before the Iowa caucuses. Again, 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the Iowa caucuses. Another piece of context is the person who this story benefits, Elizabeth Warren, just so happens to be, her campaign just happens to be flaming out in basically every metric you want to see, any metric that counts: crowd size, her individual donors, and the metric that the mainstream media loves the most, her polling. All of those things are down for Elizabeth Warren. And this story that would potentially benefit her comes out at such convenient timing, but they don't put that in the story at all. They don't qualify anything in the story with that context. More than that, the conversation happened over a year ago. And again, it just so happens to come out right at this time when it would potentially benefit Elizabeth Warren. And they don't say a word about that. They act as if this story just fell out of the sky and Elizabeth Warren and her team who planted this have absolutely no reason to be dishonest and to smear Bernie Sanders for their own personal political gain. And then now with this Joe Biden situation and him just flat out lying about him advocating for cutting and gutting Social Security, the mainstream media, again, in unison, is out defending Joe Biden and calling Bernie Sanders a liar, even though every single piece of evidence points to the contrary. And I'm really at a loss I'm at a loss for words here, because this is so blatant and this one is so brazen. Joe Biden is on tape multiple times saying we need to cut Social Security. We need to privatize Social Security. Paul Ryan is right to say we need to cut Social Security. Like, I don't know. There is literally, in the world of politics, there is no more proof that you can have that Joe Biden is lying than all the evidence that we have, all the video evidence, the documented evidence, the pieces of legislation that he supported and wrote. There is literally no more proof that you can possibly gather to prove that Joe Biden is lying. And still, they just come out and defend Joe Biden and call Bernie Sanders a liar and say that the video that his staff is circulating, one of the many videos that his staff is circulating, is, quote, doctored. They claim Bernie Sanders and his team doctored this video of Joe Biden saying we need to cut Social Security, with absolutely no proof. So all the evidence on the topic says that Joe Biden did say it. All the video evidence, documented evidence, his own legislation say he did say it, but they don't want to believe that. But Joe Biden says that the video is doctored, and everybody says, with absolutely no proof, no evidence, they didn't have any professional videographers or producers or anything look over the video and show it and explain exactly how it's doctored. Nope, none of that. Just off of Joe Biden's word alone, he says it's doctored, and they run with that part of the story too. So again, this is not a bias. This isn't something, again, internally inside their brain working and influencing their work and they don't know about it. No, these are deliberate decisions to abandon journalistic ethics and integrity and standards just to reinforce a narrative that you want, that Bernie Sanders is a liar. More than that, Joe Biden is always telling the truth, and we should always trust Joe Biden, the corporate centrist establishment candidate, and he is a better politician than Bernie Sanders. Because it reinforced that narrative for them, they ran with the story uncritically and are literally trying to pretend like Bernie Sanders made this up, even though this has been an essential part of Joe Biden's career for the last 4 decades. It's incredible. This is incredible. And when you really think about it, this is incredibly dangerous and scary because it shows you how the media, the power that they have to control discourse, political discourse in this country, and to manufacture consent to, and literally distort reality to push their own narrative, which is the narrative of the establishment and the donor class and the millionaires and billionaires. And again, it's not just this. It's not this that is leads me to believe that all the way that they cover Bernie and other lefties is deliberate media journalistic malpractice. This is just the most recent examples. I mean, of course, like I talk about on the show all the time, in the WikiLeaks, the DNC email leaks that we found, we read their own emails, and the entire Democratic establishment, the political establishment, their donors, the Hillary Clinton campaign, the Obama administration, and the mainstream media were all coordinating to smear Bernie Sanders and to undermine his campaign to prop up Hillary Clinton, who would maintain the status quo and continue to do the bidding of the establishment. So any idea that the media is a neutral arbiter in this whole thing should have gone out the window back then, because that should have been all the proof we needed to see their real intention and their real motives behind what they do. We saw it in their own words. You see it in their constant, relentless right-wing framing and demonizing of the left. The issue of Medicare for all. I always talk about how huge this healthcare crisis is in this country. There are at least 100 million people who either don't have insurance or are underinsured and can't afford to get the healthcare that they need. 40,000 people die every year because they can't afford to go to the doctor, more than any war zone on the planet. And that happens every year in the United States. Before they frame a question to Bernie Sanders or any of the lefty in the way of, hey, this healthcare problem that we have in the United States, it is disastrous. The system is broken and corrupt at every level. This private health insurance system doesn't work. What is your solution to fix this? Before they ever frame the question like that, it's always, Bernie, how are you going to pay for Medicare for all? Bernie, how are you going to pay for Medicare for all? Bernie, how are you going to pay for Medicare for all without bankrupting the country? Even though, objectively, it would cost less, it would save money, and it would cover everybody. Even though those things are true and have remained true for decades, evidenced by the fact that every other modern country in the world does have a single-payer healthcare system, and they pay less and they cover everyone. The mainstream media will never, ever frame a question like that about Medicare for all or about healthcare to Bernie Sanders or any other lefty. It's always, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? You're going to bankrupt the country? You're going to kick people off their insurance? Always this relentless right-wing framing to demonize the left. I mean, look at the last CNN debate. Jesus fucking Christ. Wolf Blitzer, the hack, the fucking biggest tool of the establishment and the media, the military industrial complex. He asked Bernie Sanders, after we've been in war, we are waging the longest wars in U.S. history, been in Afghanistan 18 years, coming up on 19 years now. We also had the Afghanistan papers that came out very recently showing that the war was a lie. They lied about what they were doing there the entire time. They don't even know who they were fighting. We're killing massive numbers of civilians, and we don't even know who the enemy was over there. Despite all of that, and by the way, every single administration, including the one that Joe Biden was a part of, lied about it. Despite all of that, despite the disastrous debacle that the Iraq war has been, despite our illegal occupation in Syria, and now Donald Trump saying we're there to steal the oil, despite the genocide in Yemen, despite all of that stuff, Wolf Blitzer has the fucking audacity to come out and ask Bernie Sanders to frame the question like this. Hey, Bernie, you say you want to get troops out of the Middle East. You know who also says they want to get U.S. troops out of the Middle East? The Grand Ayatollah of Iran. And so he frames it as if Bernie Sanders is this kooky, lunatic person who agrees with the Grand Ayatollah on foreign policy, who, by the way, they've done a great job of demonizing him and making him look like he's the biggest bad guy in the world. And I'm not saying that Grand Ayatollah is a good person. He is corrupt and runs a theocratic country. But they act like he's the biggest threat in the world. And then they frame it as if Bernie Sanders, who is advocating for non-intervention and sanity, by the way, because what we're doing right now, we're committing war crimes and our entire foreign policy is illegal, fundamentally illegal, and genocide for profit. Bernie Sanders advocates for ending these wars, and then Wolf Blitzer frames it as, you agree with the biggest bad guy that the official state baddie that we're demonizing right now. Can you elaborate on that? This is what I'm talking about. It's intentional. That's not just a slip up. You know who else thinks that we should get U.S. troops out of the Middle East? Noam Chomsky, the most prominent, most quoted intellectual of our time, the most prominent, respected, and quoted intellectual alive on this planet today, also believes we should get our troops out of the Middle East. Why didn't you frame it as like that? Hey, Bernie, you say we should get troops out of the Middle East. So does Noam Chomsky. Can you elaborate on that? Or, hey, Martin Luther King, while he was alive, way back when, also said, was also arguing against U.S. militarism and imperialism. And Bernie Sanders, you seem to have that same view of foreign policy. Can you elaborate on that? Before they would ever frame the question like that, hey, Bernie, you agree with the Ayatollah? Elaborate. What the fuck is that? So this is the point I'm trying to make. This is not a bias. It's not a slip up. They're doing this on purpose. They're trying to undermine Bernie Sanders, and they're trying to undermine the progressive, social democratic, populist leftist movement in this country, because their job is to, before anything else, before reporting facts, before telling it how it is to the American people, before any of that, their job is to manufacture consent and to set the Overton window in a way that it is acceptable, and it defends the status quo, and it defends the establishment in the current way we're doing things. That is their main job. And just simply Bernie Sanders existing and saying the things that he does is antithesis to their mission. So they go after him, and they go after people who agree with him with everything they got, and they're doing it intentionally. So I can't say exactly what it is, why people who are in new media on the left keep calling this a bias. My opinion of it is they are so afraid of people trying to compare them to Trump when they criticize the media, or they're so afraid of being called divisive and being called conspiratorial because they are so against the mainstream media, or they afraid of being called, but afraid of whatever it is. So they go out of their way to give them the benefit of the doubt, to bend over backwards at all the time, and always give them the most charitable interpretation of whatever the situation is. And they do it to avoid the criticism, whatever the criticism may be. But when they're doing that, it has gotten to the point where now they're kind of letting them off the hook. And like I said at the very beginning of this video, they provide some of the best criticism and critique of mainstream media that you could find. But in certain instances, when it comes to how they smear the left and how they deliberately go after the left, when they try to frame it as it's just a bias and it's something that's unintentionally happening in their mind, they're letting them off the hook with some of the most egregious examples of journalistic malpractice you will ever see in your life. So I think they need to just say, fuck it. I don't give a fuck what the mainstream media says about me. They are the most disgusting smear merchants you could find. So it needs to be scorched earth. It needs to be scorched earth. If you're new media, you should go, we're going to the mat with the mainstream media. There should be no, let's try to, like I've seen, like Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur or TYT do this. Like, Chris Cuomo, he's allowing us on CNN, and nobody else allows us on mainstream media. So we have to be a little bit kinder to them, and we're not gonna be too scorched earth on the mainstream media, because at least they're giving us a chance to go on TV. No. Just allowing a progressive on TV does not excuse any of the shit that they're doing. It doesn't excuse 50%, it doesn't excuse 10%, it doesn't excuse 5% of the shit that they're doing. Even though I think it's great to go on mainstream media whenever you get the opportunity and say a progressive message, if that means that you have to ease back on your criticisms of the mainstream media, and you have to hold back that fire just a little bit to avoid being compared to a Trump supporter, whatever it is, don't do it then. Don't do it. Because I think right now it's more important to tell the truth about what they're actually doing. Because what they're doing, they're trying to play, they're trying to tip the scales in this election to screw over Bernie Sanders. And that needs to be said before. That's more important. It's more important to say that than it is to go on Chris Cuomo and argue with some goofy ass centrist Democrat or some Trump supporter about whatever the issue of the day is. I think it's more important to tell the truth about how they're affecting this movement than anything else.